In tonight's Dorchester segment, we hear about some new development projects and a change of plans for the McCormack Middle School. To fill us in is the news editor of the Dorchester Reporter, Jennifer Smith. Thanks for being with us again, Jennifer.
Of course.
I'll start with McCormack Middle School. People were pretty upset about this plan to move the students from that school to another school in South Boston. What has happened since?
So since then, the school committee has heard the objections to it, essentially. So instead of partnering with the Excel High School to kind of move all of the McCormack students over there and basically take down the school, build up a new facility, and just sort through that later down the line, which a lot of parents and school administrators said took them by surprise by how rapidly that plan was rolled out, and it didn't adequately take in their feedback. The school is coming back, and so interim BPS Superintendent Laura Perel has said that instead of doing that, there will not necessarily be an Excel High School tie to it. They will actually partner with and create a new 7 to 12 grade school that would come into the McCormack's new building. So they're still taking registrants for the middle school for this coming school year, which would be the last year that it's a middle school, because remember, BPS in general wants to eliminate middle schools for the city. So it still does need to be messed around with as far as the structure of the school itself, but this essentially kicks off a new process for them to offer feedback, for the school to go back to the community and say, look, we know that something needs to be done, you know something needs to be done. This plan was rolled out a little bit too hastily. Let's figure out the best route moving forward to partner with a new high school to best use the facility.
I know they're not going to be locked out of the nice new building that's going to emerge down the line, but isn't this also about maybe curriculum and the kind of faculty and that kind of thing, the whole chemistry of the school, not just the structure? Yeah,
so that was a lot of the concern too. So some of the teachers, for instance, who have been there for years that specialize in handling the student body, which again is a much higher proportion of lower income students, a higher proportion of students of color coming from homes that have English as a second language. So yes, there was a lot of concern over making sure that the students that needed the resources that that school specifically provides would still be able to get the services that they need. So again, that's going to be part of the plan for figuring out in later meetings what the guarantee is as far as who can stay on at the school in the new building and what the resources are for making sure that students that need to leave that actual school can end up somewhere comparable.
Turning to another structural story, there was this sort of nondescript building near the old cemetery in Upham's Corner that I never understood all these years, and somebody's fixing it up and doing something really wonderful with it.
Sure, so it's the old Upham's Corner Comfort Station. If you passed it by, it probably looked a little bit more like a shed than anything else, and it's right next to the cemetery, near the beautiful Strand Theater, of course. And what's kind of been underway for the past few years ago or so has been plans to fix it up as a bike and brew shop. It's literally bike and brew, so it's a combination of bike repair shop and also a coffee shop. So right now, and our reporter Dan Sheehan was in there the other day when they got in there, they're basically taking out the inside of this little building and putting in new walls and repairing it. And so this is part of a process that in coordination with Historic Boston is going to maintain the building, which is old and historic, but also just bring new life to it and also bring a new business. Noah D'Amore also runs the Bowdoin Bike School, and he'll be the proprietor of this new shop. So it's kind of a nice situation where they finally got the funding they needed to kick it off, and they're in there putting up new walls as we speak.
And what makes Noah so interesting, he's a real believer. I mean, this guy builds community. I mean, that seems like a good foundation for a business.
Yeah, and that was always the thinking around it too, which is the Bowdoin Bike School was one thing, but now to sort of expand it into a revenue generating business to not only maintain the idea of community biking and community around biking, but also to bring in a new locally owned shop that both connects with his current advocacy efforts, especially around biking and access, and also offers the opportunity for another local proprietor to handle the coffee shop side of it. So it's kind of a two-in-one.
Turning to another kind of redevelopment, a lot of people know the South Bay is a sort of an urban, suburban shopping mall, but that's been changing, at least on the outskirts. Bring us up to date on that.
Yeah, so it's the big box land, basically, over by Andrew Station. And of course, as most people know, if they want to go over to the Home Depot or the Bed Bath & Beyond, they have to kind of scoot along the expressway from Andrew Station and then cross over into it. But what's been happening for the past few years is the owners of the South Bay Center have been building out this little community off to the side of it with new shops. You've got, a JP Licks and a Forever 21 and an Ulta Beauty and that kind of thing, and also a new movie theater that I love and pretty much live at. And so they're in the middle of their next stage for building out the completion of a few new elements. So for instance, the Wahlburgers, no matter how one feels about that, is one of those anchor tenants in the new building. So that's going to be rolling out in the next few months or so, as is a Japanese barbecue place, which is going to be over there. They're opening up a bunch of access roads, and the nice thing that a lot of people are pretty excited about actually is one of these access roads will give you a way to cross over from Andrew Station directly over into Boston Street if you wanted to kind of access everything from the backside without doing a full 360 around the building.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Jennifer Smith from the Dorchester Reporter. Jennifer, there's another development story you've been tracking for quite a while in the Port Norfolk area. That's sort of on the other side of Neponset Circle. And this is sounding more like a conversation about climate change than just putting up buildings. What's going on with that?
It really is. So everyone knows that if you're talking about most of the coast of Boston, you do have the seaport, you have a lot of East Boston, but a huge stretch of it is along Dorchester's route. And so we talked about this a few weeks back when the mayor rolled out his resiliency plan for the coast. Now, one of the few residential areas on the coast of Dorchester is in this little peninsula, this Port Norfolk Peninsula. And there was a project that's kind of been eking its way along for a decent amount of residential units. At one point, they were considering a bigger retail space, maybe a hotel. But it kind of landed with a thud with the people that already live in the neighborhood who said it was too big. They had concerns about traffic. So the city came back, and what's been happening lately is sort of an interesting conversation around how do you even plan for this peninsula to begin with? If you look at some of the slides going into 2070, for instance, you see the waters just coming in to that port. It's basically going to be a sliver by 2070 if you don't actually build in new infrastructure. So the conversation, which is pretty interesting, is how do you leverage private development that hopefully works with the neighborhood to basically prepare the port itself for the impending climate change? How do you build in protective structures? How do you preserve the marshland that's already there? And how do you really pair the private development with the public interest in that way? So it's not technically about that specific development project, but it is certainly about whatever goes there. It has to notice that the waters are rising around it and address it in some way.
What I find intriguing here, too, and I see some familiar names in the stories about this, including Ben Tankle. They've been there for decades. And they like the maritime flavor that they want to see something with boats. They don't just want to see a building with a lot of luxury units with the whole people living there. Why is that, you think?
I think a big part of it, and this really did consume a lot of the meeting over what's the best use to begin with for this site. I think a lot of it has to do with the original planning for the neighborhood, where they were looking at it as a place that was residential, but a lot of people didn't really want to be a part of it. So when they were doing the initial planning and layout, they really did envision a marina. They envisioned a maritime connection to the rest of the coast, because as they're a peninsula, they're kind of isolated out there, which they like as far as their neighborhood and preserving that. But it's a very unique location. They think there could be a connection basically from the point of that marina all the way up the coast of Dorchester, or connecting a little bit further down the coast. So their point is basically you can put housing anywhere, and there may be space for a component to this that's residential, but take advantage of developing the kind of land that you have. And if there's a space for a marina, put a marina in.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Of course. Thanks, Chris.
Jennifer Smith from the Dorchester Reporter.